G'day, welcome to Saturday Agenda. I'm David Lipson. You may not have liked last year's budget. Broken promises and unfair cuts is the way it's been described. But this week's intergenerational report demonstrates the 2014 budget measures that have been passed so far have been effective in addressing a serious long-term issue of debt and deficit. According to the report, the budget has done about half the job of avoiding $5.6 trillion of debt by 2055. The bad news? More cuts, higher taxes and/or more work will be needed to kill off the other $2.6 trillion worth of debt that's been forecast as the population ages to 2055. The question is how to balance those three, along with immigration and productivity. Earlier, I spoke to the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, about just that.
Well, what the intergenerational report shows is the challenges, but also the opportunities we face in the future, and that we need to continue to work to put ourselves on the strongest possible foundation for the future. Now, the problem is that the previous government put us on an unsustainable spending growth trajectory. Spending over the next 4 decades was going to ramp up to 37% as a share of the economy, which is unprecedented. You've got to put that into the context of the highest level of government receipts in recorded history, which was 26.2% back in 1986. So there's a big gap there. It would be completely impossible and inconceivable to increase taxes to reach government spending and to cover government spending of 37% as a share of the economy. If we were to do this, it would hurt the economy, it would seriously damage the economy, it would make us uncompetitive internationally, it would drive massive increases in unemployment. It is just not an option to try and chase that increasing spending growth trajectory that the previous government put Australia on with ever increasing taxes. What we need to do is we need to stabilise our government expenditure as a share of the economy. So we need to ensure that government spending is allocated in the most efficient and effective way possible.
Sure, but no one is really suggesting that increasing taxes should make up the whole area. Obviously, it should be a mix. But for example, I suppose in the area of income tax, income is projected to increase by almost 80%. So is there not some room there for perhaps some higher taxes in the income space? Because such a huge increase in living standards there, perhaps people would be willing to pay a bit more tax to get the services that they're demanding.
We ought to always aspire to lower taxes so we can strengthen economic growth and improve opportunity for everyone to get ahead, and of course so we can continue to create more and more jobs. I mean, right now our top marginal tax rate effectively is just below 50%. We've got the 45% top marginal tax rate. We've got the Medicare levy, which was increased in recent times to help fund the NDIS. We've got the temporary budget repair levy. There comes a point where if you continue to increase taxes, you actually provide a massive disincentive for people to work harder, and that is bad for the economy. That is ultimately bad for our revenue, and it would essentially drive more and more people to reorganise their affairs in ways that actually will have a negative impact on government revenue. So it's a matter of getting the balance right. I mean, I think that when it comes to income tax rates in Australia, we really have reached the limit in terms of what we can sensibly do on that front. We ought to focus now on making sure that we can live within our means. You've got to remember, when we talk about expenditure as a share of GDP, as GDP increases, expenditure increases in the ordinary course of events. But we ought to stabilise government spending as a share of the economy in order to ensure that we don't become less and less competitive internationally and put ourselves into this vicious downward cycle where we become weaker and weaker and less resilient over time.
So the only real alternative there that you're speaking about is cutting back further when it comes to services, or making them more efficient, sure, but that's not going to achieve the $2.6 trillion that we need to look at by 2055. So you're talking about just reducing the services that government provides?
No, well, what we're talking about is reducing spending growth. That is very different to imposing a cut. We think that we need to get spending growth under control. If you look at the progress that we've already made, we've been able to make significant progress in terms of the debt growth trajectory. We were heading for about 122% of government net debt as a share of the economy over the next 4 decades if we did not take any corrective actions. As a result of the changes we've already implemented, the reforms, the structural reforms that we've already implemented, we've been able to about halve that. But clearly there is more work to be done, and we need to continue to engage in the conversation on how that is best done. But there is no way that we can responsibly allow expenditure as a share of the economy and debt as a share of the economy to continue to ramp up the way it was when we came into government.
The other thing that appears crucial is to get older Australians to perhaps work for a little longer or return to the workforce. How do you plan to do that?
Well, I mean, that is exactly right. And this is, part of the national conversation we will be having over the next few months is exactly about that point. I mean, right now we have 4.5 working Australians of the traditional working age between 15 and 64 that are covering all those Australians 65 years and over. That is down from about 7.5 working age Australians in 1970, and it will head down towards 2.7 working Australians by 2054-55, covering all Australians over 65 years of age. It also means, that of course means that there's more and more pressure on working taxpayers to cover the expenditure for an ever-increasing part of the population. And it also means that our workforce participation continues to fall, which is a drag on economic growth, at a time when the ageing of the population, which is a good thing, we live longer, healthier, that is a good thing, but that also, of course, puts upward pressure on expenditure. So it has an impact in terms of lower revenue, it's got an impact in terms of higher expenditure. So it is very important that we reassess on how best we deal with this, and obviously convincing Australians to work longer, convincing older Australians to work longer, convincing more women to join, stay and come back into the workforce after having children is a very important part of that. And business attitudes need to adjust. Our own individual attitudes have to adjust in terms of looking more flexibly at the way we might progress through a career, through a whole lifetime.
One area that was largely forgotten in the intergenerational report is superannuation. Just 1.5 pages was actually devoted to it in this report, which is less than was given to climate change, for example. They are costing the budget, concessions in superannuation, about $6 billion in net costs, and that is just this year. This is going to grow over time. Is there a case, do you think, for lifting the age at which people can access their superannuation in the same way that you are lifting the age in which they can receive the age pension?
Well, we've made a series of very firm commitments in relation to superannuation before the last election. We said we would not make any unexpected detrimental changes to superannuation in our first term in government. We also said we would have a conversation through the tax white paper review process on how our tax policy settings could be improved to set ourselves up for the medium to long-term future. So that will be a conversation over the next few months, and whatever change we decide to progress or to proceed with, we would take to the next election so that people across Australia can pass judgment before we go ahead with any of that. But in relation to social services, in relation to superannuation, in relation to our tax settings more generally, in relation to the way we structure healthcare financing, I mean, these are all areas where we do have to have conversations on how, in the context of an ageing population, in the context of the structural challenges we're facing, how we put ourselves on the strongest possible foundation for the future.
So, just reading between that, you're saying that we should expect to have some sort of policy when it comes to superannuation from the coalition that you'll take to the election in the next couple of months? You
should expect us to have a conversation over the next 12 months or so, and you should expect that I'm not going to preempt what the outcomes of that conversation are going to be. but in the lead up to the next election, it is quite right that we will have policies that we take to the next election across all of the areas of government, and of course superannuation is a very important part of that.
Senator Matthias Cormann, thanks very much for joining us.
Always good to talk to you.